Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Rachel Rees tōku ingoa, ko roti koromātua whakatū. Nā maharu mai. Welcome to this hui of meeting of Te Kanihira of Whakatū, the Nelson City Council on Tuesday, the 12th of July. Welcome to all of you who are blowing in today. We're in person, we're a little bit bedraggled in this rather wet, windy day, and welcome to our members who are joining us on Zoom. We will start today with karakia, and for those of us in the room, we will stand, and I think we're going to open with tuia today. So those of you on Zoom are welcome to participate as well, but we'll all stand now and start with tuia karakia. Te raro, tuia ke roto, tuia ke waho, tuia te here tangata, ka ronga te po, ka ronga te o, haumi e, hui e, te ki e, kia ora. Well, lovely to see you all, either on Zoom or in person. It's nice to be back from my break. I want to, first before we get into the housekeeping, just thank Deputy Mayor Judine for being acting mayor for the last few weeks. Really appreciate all the work you've done, Judine, while I've been away, and thank you to all of the elected members for your support for Judine. And it's from the look of things, it's gone very well. You've got a lot of things achieved, and just great appreciation. So, Judine, thank you. Pleasure. We appreciate it. I've had a lovely break, come back very refreshed and ready to make the absolute most of the end of this triennium. We've still got several weeks of productive work to do. And as I've said, the triennium work does not end until the day before the election. So let's see what we can get achieved in the next few weeks. There's certainly plenty on our agenda. For today, we have a meeting that is a mixed model. So some members joining us on Zoom, some members in the chamber. I want to welcome Finn, who's our youth councillor, who's joining us today. Finn, welcome to our meeting. We really appreciate you coming in for today's meeting. You have full participation in the meeting other than voting. So you can ask questions, you can comment in the debate, you do everything but vote. So we really appreciate your contribution to the meeting. So welcome. We are supported today by Robin and April, who are taking the minutes and operating Zoom. So for those of you on Zoom, if you need to step out of the meeting, if you just put in the chat box a message to Robin so she can note that in the minutes. Welcome to Skara, who's here from the Nelson Mail. Skara, lovely to have you in person at the meeting, and great to see our staff. Good to see you, Pat, and all the staff who are joining the meeting. Welcome to you all. Now, the usual protocols are applying. So if you get up from the table in the room, please pop your mask on as you move around the room. Try and maintain that 1 metre distancing. Please don't touch the ventilation and air conditioning, because we're making sure that we have good airflow in here. And I'm sure somewhere in this room there will be a monitor to keep an eye on that. It may mean that the room gets a little bit cool at times, but I think we'll all come prepared with layers if that is the case. Hand sanitisers and masks are available on the agenda table, so if you've lost your mask, please just grab one from there, and we will move through the agenda. First up, I have an apology from Councillor Laurie. Do I have any other apologies for today's meeting? I haven't received any other apologies, so I'll move we accept Councillor Laurie's apology, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and we'll just do this vote to voices or just a raised hand, physical hand for Zoom. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Now, order of business. I'm advised that we will have Port Nelson representatives joining us at 10 a.m. for the item 9, the agenda holding company discussion. So that will be, we're expecting them. And are they joining us via Zoom, Robin? In person. Oh, they're going to come in person. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
What was that, Madam Mayor?
That was going to be at 10 o'clock, Councillor McGurk. So they'll be in at 10. There are a number of items on the agenda, and I'm conscious that this was an additional council meeting for you. So I'm going to see how long the meeting takes. And there are matters that aren't time bound, and they may get pushed into the normal sequence of meetings if we're feeling that the meeting needs to come to a conclusion. I really want to deal with the time bound matters. I think we've got one in the PE section that is time bound. the holding company matter, we want to attend to that today because that was the purpose of today's meeting, to allow extra time for your questions. And I understand you've had a really productive workshop session while I've been away, so I appreciate, Nikki, thank you very much for organising that, and to the elected members who attended that session. So we'll see how we go on order of business, but we'll get underway with public forum in a moment. Are there any interests I need to be aware of in relation to any of the items? If something comes to mind, please just signal at the time we get to the item. Okay. Any other questions? Anything I need to know? Councillor Courtney.
Your Worship, you said you've had a great holiday and you've come back refreshed, and I was just wondering now if you changed your mind and you're now standing for mayor again.
Oh, Councillor Courtney, I got asked that question a couple of times yesterday, and once I make a decision on those important matters, I don't change them. So no, I have loved being the mayor for the nearly last 9 years, and it's ready for somebody else to sit in the seat after October the 8th. So all the best to those of you who are standing for election, and I'll be watching from interest like all the other voters in Nelson. So yes. Public forum. Now, Mr. Steve Cross is joining us, and he is with us in person, so I'll invite Steve to join the meeting. Kia ora, Steve, welcome. Lovely to see you in person. Good morning. I'll let you get settled, and then I'll get you to pop your microphone on. You have circulated a document to elected members earlier this week. We appreciate that, so they've had a chance to read that. So time is allocated today for you to speak to that document or highlight any key points or add any additional information. Welcome.
Okay, I'll probably stay true to form and ad-lib a bit, but I want to start by acknowledging the huge amount of work that many of you have put into these documents, huge amount, and I'm really dismayed that you had to do that, because actually throughout this, the staff should have been acting and protecting the shareholder interest, but instead they acted as advocates for the port company. And so you've had to fight a rearguard action about turning these things into something which is acceptable from a shareholder perspective. And that doesn't sit well with me in terms of going forward, because I think there's a real issue here about how shareholders manage this interest going forward. And given that you're giving up a lot of control, your main control now will be through the statements of intent and statements of expectation. And again, you're being advised by staff on that. So there needs to be a big lift in the game now, because the whole stakes have gone up hugely. Without wanting to demean the efforts that you put into the review of the transaction documents, this isn't really about the constitution or the shareholder agreement or anything. And it's very easy to lose sight of the trees or sight of the forest by looking at the trees. And in this case, I think you need to look at the forest. What is this really about? And the transaction's all about the port company, really. It's a port company initiative. It's been driven by the port company. The airport's just coming along for the ride. And I've often wondered why the airport would do that, but because there's an old saying, if you lie down with dogs, you'll get fleas. And I don't know why the airport company would want to be joined at the hip with what is a struggling company. If you boil it all down, the transaction before you at the moment is a debt-funded recapitalisation of Port Nelson. So a lot of this is about funding. It was presented as being an interest cost saving, but actually it's about funding, because that sheer amount of the uncalled capital is a funding issue. And it's the uncalled capital is akin to equity from ratepayers being invested in the business. It has the characteristic of equity, and if the businesses fail, it is the ratepayers who will suffer the loss. I would go further and say that this is actually a preemptive bailout of P&L. So staff have constantly trivialised the significance of the uncalled capital, aka the ratepayer guarantee. You've been told time and time again that both NAL and P&L are strategic assets, whatever that means, that will never be allowed to fail, and hence nothing is changing by making an implicit guarantee into an explicit one. I don't accept that argument. But even if it is the case, at the moment, ratepayers are currently only guaranteeing $110 million of combined debt, not $233 million. So we actually have a totally new decision about the extra money that is going to be allocated and made available to these companies. And that is a separate funding decision, and it hasn't been considered as a separate decision. The transaction, just putting into place into the documents and yet another debt profile, because we've seen quite a few of them, that doesn't control this, doesn't control that new allocation. Once the uncalled capital genie is out of the bottle, it's actually going to be really hard to control it. In the private sector, and remember, P&L is supposed to operate as a private sector company would. Whenever a company wants to obtain new funding from shareholders, it would produce an offer document or a product disclosure document, previously known as a prospectus. That document would contain what would be a compelling story as to why a shareholder should invest further in the business. It'll disclose the strategy the company intends to follow, the forecast outcomes from the new investment, the risks, the use that the investment will put to. It'll draw comparisons between what would happen if you don't do this versus what they're going to do. I've been through this. I actually was the CEO of a struggling company, New Zealand Wind Farms, and we had a funding issue. And I had to go to shareholders who were most unimpressed by having to put their hands on their pockets to fund it. I had to put up a very detailed funding case to show that they were actually better off doing this than not doing it. And so I don't, why are you not doing that? Why are you not saying to Port Nelson, you have to convince us as to what the funding is. What's the story? Where's the story here? What is the P&L strategy to survive, revive, and thrive? So far, the strategy seems to be nothing more than give us access to more funding and keep out of our business. And the only strategy that I see that Port Nelson's got at the moment is go and steal cargo off its competitors. And I've called that a plan so cunning you could put a tail on it and call it a weasel. It's like all of Baldrick's plans, it's doomed to fail. So where's the story? If you were an existing private investor in P&L, if you owned this business and seeing the poor performance of the port company and heeding the warnings from the Office of the Auditor-General on the considerable risks faced by port companies making new investments, and the Auditor-General has specifically come out with this. You could read his report and say it's exactly this situation. And the risks of stranded assets, underperforming capital, low returns, asset write-downs. I mean, the port companies throughout the country have been writing down assets like crazy. If you saw all that, would you be doubling your investment in this business? You would be extremely careful about further investment, and you'd want to see a compelling story. Where is the story? Where is the peer review, strategic review of the business? And today I'm going to suggest that, you kind of got this Brexit situation where you made a resolution last year to set up a holding company. And now that you're getting into it, you're starting to say, holy hell, I didn't realise what we got into. But you can actually give effect to last year's resolution. You can actually approve today all the things that need to be done to set up the holding company. And what I'd say to that when it's set up, you'd say to the establishment board, your first job is to commit to undertake a strategic review of the business and to prepare the funding case that you need. And give us the funding options, because you've never been given any options. You've been given one option, which is go to LGFA and make the ratepayers responsible. They should be coming to you with a fully worked up proposal that says this is how we are going to survive, revive and thrive. And so take out everything to do with funding today and just set up the holding company. Set up the holding company, put it in place. I mean, I've got doubts about even doing that, but I don't care about that. What I care about is the $120 million of new funding that's going to go into these businesses without a proper business case. I'm going to skim past some of the other stuff I've talked about. I'm sure you've all read it. What you need to do here is you need to start behaving like shareholders, not spectators. Shareholders don't hand over $120 million blank cheques without being convinced of the reason to do so. There's some other things here. Whenever I look at this, I keep circling back to the Larson report into failings at Dunedin City Council, and that was a seminal work on CCTO governance. And actually, every time I read it, there's some more wisdom comes out of it. But one of them is this whole question of risk and being on the same page, and alignment between shareholders and the CCTOs, common understanding of risk, a common understanding of what is going forward. There is no common understanding. You're not on the same page because there is no page. And I do have some real issues still about this whole structuring and the devious circumvention of the Local Government Act. And there is a big issue about whether you are breaching Section 62 on a guarantee. And it's no secret I've taken some legal advice on that. And I've certainly had my lawyers tell me there's more than a sniff of a guarantee around this. And, I can't get to a point where I'm certain about that because I haven't seen the security deeds, and none of you have either. And some of you might be interested in knowing what are the events of default, what are the rights of the LGFA to step in. You haven't seen any of that, and it's been kept secret, and it's been kept secret deliberately, I think, because I'd love to see it, because that is fundamental as to whether this is a guarantee or not, and you're entering into an illegal contract. So I've suggested today you put a couple of columns on a sheet of paper and say reasons why I'm voting for this proposal and reasons why I'm voting against it. Because the only reason so far that you've been given to vote for is interest cost savings. And actually bear in mind that when it comes to the airport, some of those interest cost savings will go back to Air New Zealand because they're under a rigorous price control regime. So I've got a list here of I'll read very quickly and tell you the reasons.
Yeah, that was the 10-minute bell, so if you could wrap up, we'd appreciate that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So very quickly, there's been no compelling case presented by P&L for further investment. There's no strategic context been given for the recapitalisation. No consultation with ratepayers about the $120 million debt burden that they'll be assuming. The consultation has been an exercise in deceit. NAL's position, I won't do it. The transactions remove important checks and balances played by the trading banks, and we've never really addressed that properly. The transaction undermines the commercial imperative on the port company, which is meant to operate. It's meant to operate under, and it takes us back to being a harbour board, basically. And the arrangements reduce any imperative on the port company to achieve efficiencies, to adapt to the rapidly changing port scene, and to exit underperforming parts of the business. And it further compounds the unbalanced portfolio that this council has in the port company. You have a massive exposure to the port company already. Most investment advisors would tell you that you should have a balanced portfolio, not double down on a struggling business. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for coming to talk to us today to express your opinions. And we've got time for one or two questions if they're reasonably quick. I'll go to Councillor Sampson, who's on Zoom. Kia ora, Rachel.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Madam Mayor, through the chair. Kia ora, Steve, thanks very much for that. And I also really appreciate you circulating your document in advance. So I just had two really quick questions. One is around the borrowing to pay dividends. That must be a fairly standard practice in most kind of companies. So I'm just wondering where, in your view, the issue is with that, with the port company borrowing, drawing down on its debt to pay dividends, if that's something that's undertaken more widely.
Okay, it's not unusual for companies on a short-term basis sometimes to pay out dividends using debt, but this is a developing history. And what's happening is that the port company's dividend policy at the moment is based all around net profit, not cash. And the true measure of a company's performance at the end of the day is its ability to generate surplus cash. And anyone who is experienced in company valuations will tell you that you do discounted cash flow analysis. You don't look at profit, because profit can be swung around by a whole lot of things, mainly in the case of the port asset revaluations. So it regularly revalues its assets, which is probably a good thing, but quite a lot of the profit in the past has actually been through asset revaluations. So when you link your dividend payout to reported profit, it's actually not real earnings. It's not real earnings that have come through. And of course, in the downturn here, a lot of the asset revaluations that may have been undertaken are probably looking, they might reverse. So a dividend policy linked to net profit only is you have to look at cash flows, and to see that the company has been borrowing in order to pay dividends consistently. And I've only been able to go back 3 years, but I suspect it's a bit longer than that. And so
Thank you, Steve. I think you've made your point. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'll go
thanks.
on. I'd like to go on to Councillor Courtney. Councillor Sensor, it's okay, because I've really only got time for a couple of questions, so I want to share them around a little bit. Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mayor Rachel. Steve, thank you very much for your presentation this morning and your interest in this very important topic. Very important topic. You made mention in your presentation about the Auditor-General. Could you expand on his concerns in relation to...
Okay, so I mean, I'm happy to circulate his report. I think I have done that once before, a summary page.
Just a little brief...
Okay, so I mean, it's quite unusual in a way for the Auditor-General to write a specific item on industry sectors, but in this case, following his review of the port companies, and the Auditor-General audits most of them, he's expressed great concern about the propensity to overinvest and have poor business cases, because what's happening is most companies are putting up business cases that assume that they can get more cargo, but the competing ports are putting up the same business case assuming that they're going to have that cargo as well. And so not everyone's going to win on that. And there's been some cases. Port of Lyttelton had to write down $290 million because it made investments on wildly optimistic assumptions about volume. And you also recently know that Port of Auckland had to write down 65 million, but actually independent commentators suggest that Port of Auckland has lost something like $500 million in opportunity on their investment. So it's a bloodbath. The whole sector is a bloodbath.
Thank you.
Steve, thank you. Look, I just got a very quick clarification question of you. It appears in your bullet points that you are working on the basis that the additional 120 million is going to be further investment with Port Nelson Limited.
Oh, look, I've talked generically about Port Nelson.
Right, thank you. Okay.
I've seen numbers that say 90 million to the port and 30 to the airport.
Right, okay.
But really, the airport can survive on its own. It's a very good business. Thank you, Rob Evans. He did a fantastic job on putting it onto a good footing.
Thank you, Steve. All right, Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us today. Appreciate that. Now, Robin, we've got the next public forum presentation, and I think our representative of Aotearoa Collective for Public Transport Equity, speaking to the remit at the Local Government New Zealand Conference. The remit is promoted by Porirua City Council, but must be supported by a number of other councils or a zone to have made it through. And we've got representatives on the screen today. Kia ora, welcome to the meeting. And I can see Lavinia and I can see Pippa. And I think that's all who are going to be joining us today. Is that right? I'll just check with April. That's it. Okay, kia ora. Welcome to you both. Welcome to our meeting. We're looking forward to hearing from you today, and I think we've allocated 10 minutes for your presentation and hopefully an opportunity for some questions as well. So just whenever you're ready, I'll invite you to speak to Council. Kia ora.
Thank you. Kia ora. Good morning. My name is Pippa and this is Lavinia, and we're here on behalf of the Aotearoa Collective for Public Transport Equity, the coalition behind the Free Fares campaign. We are a group of over 70 climate groups, churches, student associations, poverty action groups, disability action groups, political groups and councils across Aotearoa. We are calling for central government to fund free public transport for tertiary students under 25s, community service card holders and total mobility card holders and their support people.
Today, we wanted to bring your attention to a remit put forward by Porirua City Council to the Local Government New Zealand Conference taking place this July. A copy of this remit has been sent to your public forum team for you to read over. With this remit, through LGNZ, you have the opportunity to join the voices of thousands of New Zealanders calling for public transport equity, and it costs you nothing. Increasing our public transport patronage and removing cost barriers is key to mode shifting towards a cleaner, greener New Zealand and acting in line with the urgent climate emergency our government declared.
This remit is important because we need as many voices calling for equitable public transport as possible. We are in a climate emergency, and over the past 3 decades, our emissions from transport have doubled. The Nelson City Council has made a commitment to take action against climate change, and it needs to honour this. For many of our poorest and most vulnerable people, the cost can be a huge barrier to using public transport.
After doing some research in our Nayland College community and talking to students and parents, we know the positive impact free fares would have in Nelson. Year 13 Nayland College student Anjali says, "I would like the public transport to be free. It will help me a lot because I have to take the bus every day and I spend $18 a week, and that money can help me to use it for food." Another student, Dante, says, "It would make it much easier for when my mum is busy to pick me up or drop me off. Students usually have less money, and using the bus every day, twice a day, accumulates a great balance that we are usually in charge to pay with our part-time jobs. Many other students and I choose to walk to save the money, but if the bus was free, we could save more time to study." When the idea of free fares was proposed to these students, they got very excited, sharing the real impact this would have in their everyday lives. These students are children who shouldn't have to carry the weight of their financial burden for themselves, but this is their reality, and free fares would help significantly.
A Nayland College parent of a student who has been using the bus service for over 3 years from Mapua said that the $38 vegetable bill for their family of 2 for a whole week. She's a business owner, works full-time, employs several people, and is a single mum, so every dollar really does count for her. It's clear that the people of Nelson, who you represent, would benefit from this change immensely.
Supporting the free fares remit sends a signal to the government that more investment needs to be made in public transport. We know people in many parts of New Zealand still do not have regular and reliable access to public transport. Nelson has a long way to go with this. Increasing the frequency and reliability of public transport is really important, but if people who need it cannot use it because it's too expensive, then what would be the point? Cost is a huge barrier to equitable transport, and we're asking this council today to support this remit as a stepping stone to future investment in public transport.
This will cost councils nothing. All this remit asks is for councils to use its voice and advocate to central government for this ask. Rates will not have to go up, and this remit is not asking Nelson City Council to commit to making fares free for our target groups. This remit asks Council to join the many voices already calling for free public transport for tertiary students, under 25s, community service card holders, and total mobility card holders and their support people. Supporting this remit and advocating alongside other councils for government to honour their commitment to a climate emergency does not cost councils a cent. However, as climate change continues to worsen, often it is more isolated and rural communities that are impacted most by severe flooding and terrible weather events, as we have seen in our neighbouring town of Westport in recent years. Calling on government to act now is hugely important and free, with the potential to save both local and central government a lot of money down the line.
This is a great opportunity for this council to stand up as representatives for their community. The majority of New Zealanders support climate action and want to see people living with dignity. Everyone should have the opportunity to access public transport so they can get into education and employment, and currently cost is one huge barrier to that. Council has an opportunity here to stand up for hard-working, ordinary New Zealanders and should support this remit to do just that. And then that's the end of our submission. So if you have any questions for us, we're happy to take them.
Thank you, Lavinia. Thank you, Papa. Thank you very much for your very clear advocacy and the work that you're doing. I'll see if there are any questions of clarification, but you've made a compelling, very clear presentation. So if there are no questions, please don't be offended. It just means it's a very good submission. I do have a question from Councillor Brand. Kia ora, Trudy.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you for your presentation. I do have a clarification. Lavinia, you said that it will cost you nothing. Can you please clarify what you meant by that? Because I hear you say later in your submission that you said Nelson City Council can push back to central government and therefore it costs the ratepayer nothing. But then is that what you meant when you said it will cost us nothing?
Yes, I think Pippa, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. What we mean by it won't cost Nelson City Council anything. I think in the past it has been proposed that the council fund this for Nelson specifically, but what we're saying is that this is a national level ask, and so it's not up to individual councils to fund, but rather a national level thing to be funded by central government.
Okay, thank you. And then just the further clarification on that point is, if it's going to central government to fund, what is your understanding of where central government get their funding from?
Yeah, so that the way that they choose to fund this is up to them, because they have access to data and experts and research, and it would be up to them on how, figuring out how much it would cost, how they would implement it. But this could come out of many ways. It could come out of the annual budget, the emissions reduction plan, the land transport fund could contribute to it. There are many places they could use this money from. What we're saying is we're trying to stress the importance of delegating the money they already spend and doing so in an effective way. And so not necessarily just creating another cost for them, but to see that the money that they're spending is going to somewhere that would impact many people and be spent wisely.
Thank you. Thank you, Pippa. I've got questions from Councillor Sanson, Councillor Noonan and Councillor Eager. We'll need to be reasonably quick on questions and answers to get through in the 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, through the chair. Lavinia and Pippa, thanks so much for your really, really compelling submission. You may be aware that Councillor Rohan O'Neill-Stevens and I tried really hard to get the free fares, get Nelson City Council to sign the free fares campaign. Unfortunately, we failed twice, but I'm just wondering if there's anything that we can do, Nelson City Council, to kind of support this advocacy further, and also if there's anything that you think we could be doing locally, I guess, to support the accessibility of public transport for our community. Thanks.
So probably, Pippa and Lavinia, I'll just let you know that on today's agenda, there is a report where we have the opportunity to support the remit for the LGNZ conference. So Councillor Sense will have the opportunity to deal with that one. But are there any additional things? So just in the second part of that question, anything you want to comment on?
Thank you for bringing that up. We have been campaigning for a while now, and as you said, we're very grateful to you and your support. And if council were to agree on this, putting their name down as an organisation that supports the campaign would be very beneficial to the cause. There are many councils around New Zealand who have already done this, and it just gives a lot of weight behind our campaign and shows that on a bigger scale, this is really something that deserves attention. From an individual standpoint, there are many ways you can contact us. If you want to learn more too, you can go to our website, and there are ways to help the campaign in Nelson and also on a wider scale.
Thank you, Pippa. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you. Good morning. Question is, it looks like you're trying to do two things, so reducing emissions and helping those that can't afford public transport. But I see that this remit doesn't include gold card holders who traditionally already have that ability. Is it the view to remove them or is this in addition to?
No, it's certainly not. It's certainly not the aim to remove their what they benefit from having the gold card. This would be an additional thing. So we wouldn't want to take that away, because as we've seen from a lot of data that the Ministry of Transport has collected, it's been very beneficial for the public transport system and for the community for having the fares free for gold card holders. So yeah, that's really important to keep that there.
Thank you. Wasn't clear from the submission or the remit. That's why I was querying it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go across to the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Iga.
Morena, you talked about research, and so research that we've been shown from Waka Kotahi has demonstrated that frequency and reliability are the key factors for increasing use of public transport. So under the premise that, you know, there's a limited pots of money for any services that councils, governments run, so you think that reducing the fares is the better spend rather than increasing frequency and reliability?
Yeah, we think that this should be prioritised because, I mean, if you've used the buses in Nelson, you can see that they're never full, they're always pretty empty. And so we think that if people who would ideally take the bus, but they can't really afford it, so they choose something else, can't. So if people aren't using the bus because of those barriers, then there wouldn't be any point of increasing the frequency because you just get a bunch of empty buses. Whereas if we have more people choosing to use the bus because because it's free for them, then there'll be more of a need for more buses, and then we could be increasing the frequency of them then.
Thank you. Thank you both very much again for coming in to present today. We really appreciate you joining us, and again, just thank you very much for the advocacy that you are doing. Kia ora. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
That concludes our public forum. We'll move on to the minutes now. Now, there are a range of minutes that are coming through today, quite a few of them actually. Now, as I have been away, I haven't, Robin, done the usual run through of these. I don't think I have. Some of them I have, some of them I have. Okay, I'm just trying to remember which one I have or I haven't. But Deputy Mayor, you've had a good chance to go through them. Excellent. All right, so I'll crack into the minutes and we'll start with the minutes of the 10th of May, and they're on pages 20 through 34 of your agenda. Are there any corrections to the minutes? No. In that case, would somebody care to move? Thank you, Councillor Courtney, seconded by Councillor McGurk. I will put the motion, and for the purposes of Zoom, I'm happy if you want to use the physically raised hand, if that's faster for you. That will suit you? Okay, we'll do that, and I'll keep an eye on the screen. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. Moving to the 19th of May, and they're pages 35 through 45 of your agenda. Any corrections or additions to the minutes? No, in that case, I will move there a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder? Somebody who's second. Thank you, Councillor McGurk. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Moving to the extraordinary meeting of the 26th of May, and that's pages 46 through 48 of your agenda. Somebody care to move? Councillor Ihl Stevens, thank you. And do I have a seconder? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Iga.
Oh, yeah, just the last one.
Oh, we've missed one. Did I miss one?
Page 43.
Oh, page 43.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
What was just sorry, just so I can catch up on that. What was on page 43?
It's reconvened.
Oh, reconvened. Okay, that's fine. No, that's right. So just for clarity, we're now on extraordinary meeting of the 26th of May. It's been moved by Councillor Ihl Stevens, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And then we're on to the 7th of June, pages 49 through 51. Do I have a mover for those?
Yep.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and a seconder, Councillor Bowater. No corrections. In that case, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And then the 14th of June, pages 52 through 66 of the agenda. Do I have a mover for those minutes? Councillor McGurk, thank you very much. And a seconder. Somebody who's second, Councillor Ihl Stevens, thank you. No corrections or additions. I will put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, the 23rd of June, pages 67 through 69. Somebody to move those minutes. Councillor Edgar, thank you, and Councillor Courtney, thank you very much. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to the recommendations from committees, and we'll commence with the Infrastructure Committee. This is item 6.1 on page 5 of your agenda, and the first item relates to the quarterly report. I'll go to Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor, and through you. Recommendation from the Infrastructure Committee approving unbudgeted capital funding of $2 million for the Washington Valley Infrastructure Upgrade Project to cover the previously unidentified and unknown coal tar hazardous material to be disposed of at the York Valley landfill. So I've moved.
Thank you, and second by Councillor Ihl Stevens. Any questions? Councillor Sanson.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, through the chair. I'm just wondering, is it possible, do we have Officer Laverdis in the room? Is it possible to ask him a question?
Yes, absolutely. He is here. So yes, you've got Mr. Laverdis, Ms. Harrison and Ms. McDonald in the room.
Lovely, thanks. So I think I'm just wanting to understand where the significant costs are in this project, given that it's unbudgeted $2 million. Is it in the disposal of the material and sourcing new material? And, you know, what kind of, what size or what area is it that's being excavated and disposed of? Because it's just, you know, $2 million for disposal of coal tar seems fairly significant. I just wanted to understand the scope of it.
Through the chair. As I advised the Infrastructure Committee earlier on the 23rd of June, coal tar is something that we normally find and we normally test. We do test on our contracts. In this particular case, it has been found at depths between 1 metre and 1.8 metre, and that has not occurred previously. We're looking at a quantity of about 1,650 cubic metres, and the predominant cost is the removal and the disposal of the York landfill. The rates at the landfill are fixed, and we have to remove that and dispose of it. So the majority of the costs are in the disposal to the landfill. We cannot use that material on site, and we certainly cannot use that material in any other location. So there are costs in terms of removal, but the majority of the costs are in terms of disposal.
Thanks very much. And just one further question, if I may.
Absolutely, no problem.
Thanks. So just if it doesn't cost all of the $2 million, then I'm assuming that council just doesn't draw down on the full amount, and that becomes a lesser unbudgeted amount, you know, 1.8 million or 1.5 or something like that. Is that correct?
Through the chair, absolutely. This is an estimate of what we think it would cost, and if we don't use it, then clearly it doesn't get spent. Yes.
Thanks. And I'm assuming that if it doesn't get used, it also doesn't just stay kind of earmarked for roading infrastructure, or does it?
Through the chair, it'll all come up through the wash. This is for this particular project, and if we don't use it, then it'll just be declared a saving on this particular project.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. No further questions.
Thank you. Can I just follow up on Councillor Sanson's question? So just in relation to the funding, Alec, will it be earmarked for the purposes of addressing the coal tar issue? So when it comes to the budget allocations, is it specified for that purpose? I just want to if there are other budgetary increases on the project, can this money be used for those purposes as well?
So through the chair, at this moment in time, the project is tracking well in terms of contingency, and the wet weather is certainly playing havoc with us. But this additional amount is earmarked for the disposal of the coal tar.
All right, so it will be ring fenced for that purpose. So if there are other budgetary changes, they'll come back as separate items in relation to the project.
And through the chair, we'd address that as normal in our quarterly report if that situation eventuated, yes.
Excellent. Okay, and just a follow-up question in relation to this. I mean, this is a significant additional capital cost. So I guess I just have a question. I know this has been addressed at the Infrastructure Committee, but as it's here, why wasn't this identified as part of the site investigations at the time, prior to the commencement of the project?
So through the chair, we undertook quite extensive testing. We usually find coal tar usually in the top 500, 300 mils to 500 mils layers. That's where we've typically found it everywhere else. In this particular site, we did 19 tests for coal tar on that section. The coal tar that we found was in a different form. It wasn't evenly distributed throughout the layers. It was in clumps. So we could have hypothetically undertaken 50 tests and not determined that there was coal tar. It's one of those things that we potentially would never have known about. We are looking at what we do for the rest of the sections in terms of how we identify whether there was coal tar in stages 2 and 3, and I'm working with my team to find out a better method of determining or trying to accurately predict what that is. But in this case, two things: it was in clumps, it was not contiguous throughout the whole layers, and it was at depths that we had not previously identified.
And I understand it came from the gasworks, is that right? Is this some sort of approach that was taken historically for disposing of what we now call hazardous waste, where it was just dumped into construction projects?
Indeed. So through the chair, typically coal tar has been used in road construction since the mid-1970s. It is a byproduct of the gasworks, and a lot of these sites are in close proximity to the old gasworks. And I guess back then it was a convenient form of disposing, cheap backfill. We didn't understand back then the implications of the material that they were using. We now know more, we now know better, just like asbestos, and we need to address it accordingly.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Alec, I'm just wondering if how much work was done when that coal tar was laid or put in there. Does council know how much work was done at that point in time? Was it just that section, or were there other sections of work at the same time that we need to be concerned about potentially?
So through the chair, we have no ways of knowing what was actually disposed of and where. We do know that in the areas of around the old gasworks that we do anticipate coal tar, and as I said, we from the first time we identified it, we routinely now test for it, and we have been pretty accurate. But in terms of the quantity and where and when, I think as you move away from the inner city, the use of coal tar probably diminishes, and we haven't really found it out in the suburbs. But certainly in the inner city, it is a standard material that we find, or a standard contamination in our sites.
Thank you. And do we know what year that was put in there?
As I said through the chair, coal tar was used in road construction from the mid-1970s. The as-builts are useless in this particular case because they don't specify what coal tar was being put in and where and when. It just confirms that the road had been constructed.
So nowadays, when we do work and we find things like that, do we notify, do we have good records of what's going in now?
Oh, absolutely. Through the chair, yes. Absolutely.
And our records have started improving when? This, as you know, when it came to the meeting, I was not happy because it was a week after we signed out the annual plan. So that's why I queried you a lot at the time. But what I'm looking towards now is the future and what what we might find. And if we did a section of work and we know that around the city we did 3 big jobs in that year or that period of time, I'd like to think that we can sort of really be aware of what is under the ground so that we don't have these unbudgeted.
Through the chair, we routinely test for things underneath the ground. As I said, this was a particular a case of depth, 1 to 1.8 meters, and the form that it took. It wasn't evenly distributed through the layers, but in clumps. And as I said, we could have taken 50 trial holes in this particular case, and we wouldn't have picked that up.
Okay, so I think we've identified that it's an unusual situation.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm trying to figure out how we move forward so that we can address this this unusual situation going forward.
All right, thank you. And I'll just come back to Councillor McGurk. So just following up for Councillor Noonan's comment about the meeting, you're satisfied that the matter came to hand too late to be incorporated into the annual plan?
Yes, it was for this financial, well, it was in the last financial year the expense was incurred, so the recast, I think, was for next year.
Fine, thank you. Right, that clarifies that matter. Thank you. All right, that's been moved and seconded. I'm now, no further questions. We'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's carried. Thank you. Moving on to the Community and Recreation Committee recommendations to Council. They are at 6.2 of our agenda on page 5, and I will invite Councillor Skinner to present the recommendations.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and welcome back. Hope you had a refreshing break. Yes, and for Community and Recreation, recommending to Council, this is in regards to the joint regional cemetery. Approves a memorandum of understanding between Nelson City Council and Tasman District Council, and also delegating responsibility for any minor changes to the memorandum of understanding to the co-chairperson.
Recommendations, Councillor Brand, thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Skinner? No questions? Any debate? In that case, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
No.
All right, I need to do a
Right.
show of hands on that one because I've got some who are for and some who are not in the room. So if we can just get I'll take those in favour. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Councillor Sanson 6, 7. That's carried. Okay, on that basis, I'll take it. If you want to take the against, I can. But I think that's clear that that's carried. Right, thank you very much. Satisfied with that in the room and on screen. Now, the next item, Councillor Skinner, is the adoption of the Out and About on Tracks strategy on page 5.
Thank you, and once again recommending that the Out and About on Tracks strategy 2022, and the delegating of responsibility for any minor amendments to the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. And a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Brand. Any questions for Councillor Skinner? Any debate? In that case, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. And then moving on to follow-up review on the Nelson Centre of Musical Arts item. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. And this is in regards to that portion of that decision where it was a recommendation to Council on revoking the decision made at Council meeting back in December 2019 in regards to the unbudgeted expenditure for the support, business advice support. Thank you.
Thank you. And a seconder by Councillor Brand. Any questions? Any debate? In that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We're now going to take a 5-minute break and then we're going to come back to move on to the holding company item. I think we do have the port company representatives here, but I'd just like us all to take a 5-minute break. We'll start again at 10:05. Kia ora tātou, we'll resume our meeting. We're going to move to item 9 on the agenda, and that is on pages 135 through 212 of your agenda. This is the holding company decision, and I have noted that we have some matters in the confidential agenda that relate to this item, so at some point we will need to go into confidential, but I want to start in public, and I'm going to invite Ms Harrison to introduce the item. And we also have in attendance, we have our representatives from Port Nelson. So at the appropriate time, Nikki, I'll just get you to invite the representatives to come to the table. But first, I want to give you the chance to just set out what's in front of us today, and also give me some guidance as to when you want to go into confidential.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the purpose of today's supplementary report is to consider the matters and the recommendations that came through from the Joint Shareholders Committee on the 7th of June. There was a request for some additional information to assist with the decision making around the holding company proposal, and then there's also updated legal sign-off, Constitution Shareholders Agreement attached as well. So there's a whole suite of recommendations that have come through from the Joint Shareholders Committee. There are a couple of matters that I'd just like to touch on briefly. There have been questions raised at the Joint Shareholders Committee and also the public forum this morning around whether or not the quantum of the uncalled capital was something that was adequately consulted on or flagged in the consultation document. So officers believe that the proposal in the long-term plan was a fair representation of the options to establish the holding company as a CCO. The quantum of their uncalled capital wasn't known at that time. The issue of the uncalled capital was raised during the submission process, and it was considered as part of that deliberation report before the council decided to proceed with the holding company. So there is a good understanding of the community's views as to the importance of these strategic assets, the port and the airport to the region, and that ratepayers and businesses would not expect them to fail. The commercial reality, I stand by this, is that there is no change to council support, assumed versus formalised.
See if there's any questions on those matters. I do have a couple. So one is just in relation to the deliberations report. You're saying that matter of the uncalled capital was canvassed in the deliberations report. Can you just give us fleshed out a little bit more detail on that, Nikki, please?
So the matter of the uncalled capital was raised by submitters and it was considered in the deliberation report. There was a section on it in terms of the options. It really was saying that it's a formalisation of the current arrangement and is not materially affecting the risk that the council already holds in relation to those strategic assets.
All right, and as I understand it, in the I think you've said to us previously in terms of matters in relation to our credit rating, Standard & Poor's, that is one of the assumptions that they make. So essentially in the process of the long-term plan, the assumption made by Standard & Poor's is that we would not let either the port or the airport fail.
So through the chair, for each council's credit rating, Standard & Poor's take into account our 50% share of the debt of the port and the airport already in assessing our credit rating, and they've explicitly said within that credit rating report that comes every year is that they would not expect the councils to let those entities fail and not meet their debt obligations.
Thank you. We've got elected members with questions. I'll go to Councillor Sampson and then to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, through the chair. In regards to the matter of the uncalled capital in the deliberations report, is it possible for that to be circulated by email to elected members so that we can view what was written? I just feel like most elected members, and I guess apropos the community, were largely unaware of the quantum that we were talking, that the uncalled capital would be diluting the paid up shareholding in the entities by 97%. So paid up capital is only going to be 3% and uncalled capital is going to be 97% of the shareholding. So I'm just wondering if whatever was covered in the deliberations report could be circulated to elected members. Thanks so much.
Nikki, do you want to make any comments on those? On that
So
measure?
through the chair, yes, I mean, it could be circulated. It doesn't, as I said before, it didn't go into the quantum of the uncalled capital, but it did go into the issues of the risk.
All right, and then just the comments that Councillor Sanson are making there in terms of the 3% and 97%. Do you have any response to that?
Through the chair, I mean, that's really just saying about the uncalled capital as a proportion of the capital of the IHL, and I mean I don't think that is really relevant to the decision today.
All right, thank you. Go to the Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Courtney.
Nikki, hi. Through the Mayor, could you please just clarify the difference between the actual debt that may be held in the debt facility?
So through the chair, yes, that was going to be my next item to cover off. In terms of the uncalled capital, I'd like to draw your attention to 4.6 in the cover report, which actually shows the debt profile of the port and the airport over the 10-year period. The uncalled capital amount of 233 is not the debt that is in there. It is not. There is, sorry, and it's covered in 4.11. The uncalled capital facility is not an authorisation of the group's debt levels. So how that is built up is that there is an underlying core debt of 100 million, and this is only calculated out to June 2026. So the actual debt within those entities is very stable. So if you look at the graph in 4.6, the debt over the next 4 years is very stable within the two organisations. And there is a core debt amount of 100 million. There's a working capital and liquidity facility that sits above that, just to kind of deal with seasonal fluctuations and liquidity, the same as what we've got. We've got a liquidity facility as well. That's calculated at 46 million above that. And then the rest is really just a contingency. So there is absolutely no authorisation, as was alluded to this morning, for either entity to go out and borrow an additional $100 million. That is not correct at all. So the key authorisation of the debt and the debt within that group is through the Statement of Intent, Statement of Expectation process. So the IHL board, which includes 2 independent directors, one of which is an independent chair, will be forming up the statement of intent for both entities and balancing that debt requirement within the group to maintain the shadow credit rating.
Just a couple of other questions. So in the IHL SOIs that will come forward, will there be reporting of actual debt as well as uncalled capital capacity? Will that be broken down?
Absolutely, through the chair. And I think what I see happening in the report, we've absolutely canvassed this idea, these matters, and have identified that we do need to look at some improvements through the statement of intent process. The statement of, so within this there are a number, it's covered in 4.15. There are a number of things that we will be looking at with forming up the IHL statement of intent, and there will be a clear need to report actual debt versus the contingent liability, being the uncalled capital amount. So really we need to be looking at what those financial covenants are within the statement of intent, looking at really having a really clear picture of the projected capital the capital program. I think what we've suggested is we'd want to see that out 10 years to understand what that debt requirement is and what risk, what that means for the councils, and also, strengthening that no surprises and materiality and significant thresholds.
I've just got another follow-up question from that. So, because there's a lot of commentary and there's been a lot of talk about the, I guess, potential poor financial positions or overuse of debt. So with the 10-year forecasting in the SOIs, does that then enhance the ability to see any key issues going forward? And will the 10-year forecasting then also look at other measures, the other metrics that we look at, those other ratios that we already have? Will they also sort of look at that 10-year so we can, see if there's any other, I guess, red flags going up?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. That's a good question, and this is something that certainly came up in the workshop with council. Is kind of that flagging of climate risk and that future capital program, and I think what we'll be looking for is those high-level financial metrics rolled out across the period. I mean, recognising that the statement of intent is done annually, but certainly that. It should having a longer term capital program in there at a high level should flag to the shareholders any projects of concern within that climate space.
Okay, I'll have more questions later, but
Right,
that's it for now. Thank you.
I'll go to Councillor Courtney and then back to Councillor Sanson and then to Councillor McGurk.
Thank you, Mayor Rachel, and through to Officer Harrison. Thank you, Nikki, for your presentation. The composition of the interim board is in our documents here, clearly. Who selects, when does that, how long is the life of that interim board?
Through the chair, there was a decision made at the joint shareholders on the 7th of June, and those resolutions haven't flowed through to here because they were actually made within the delegations of the Joint Shareholders Committee, that really we would be moving from that interim board to the transition board to the permanent operational board within 12 months. And that there's definitely priority on getting to that point reasonably quickly. And that operational board, just as a reminder for everyone, has the independent chair, another independent director, and the chair of the port and airport boards sitting on that.
So I couldn't see it in the document. That's why I couldn't see it. It doesn't, okay, fine, that's all right. I thought it might be me. Nikki, through you, Madam Mayor. Why is it beyond the transition board or whatever it's called, interim board, why don't shareholders have the opportunity to select the board? Why are we being told that a new holding company will select their board beyond the transition board? Why are we taking that lead from officers? Do you understand where I'm going with this? Okay, well, I'll ask it again. I think, and the community thinks, that shareholders should select the holding company board members, as they are doing at the moment, the independent chair.
Nikki?
for clarity, the shareholders will be appointing the independent chair,
I know that, yes.
and they will be appointing the other independent director. And the decision to appoint, to have the two other parties at the moment being the chair of the port and the chair of the airport was made at the Joint Shareholders Committee meeting on the 7th.
But beyond that, I'm talking about, is that?
So through the chair, that's for the operational board, and that, i.e. after the 12-month period, that was the decision made. But it's not a permanent decision. If the shareholder changes their mind about the composition of that board, there's nothing in any legal document that says that that is the composition of the board. It is a shareholder's decision about that composition.
So essentially, the control of the appointments remains with the shareholders, with the two councils. So if the shareholders, a future joint shareholders committee decided, on behalf of the councils that they wanted to change that, they're perfectly entitled to make that change. I think the other matter that we canvassed, Nikki, with joint shareholders is in relation to the appointments to the subsidiary companies. There is also a role there for the council, so it might be worth just covering that off for the council meeting today.
Yeah.
Good. So through the chair, in the documents, there is a governance and appointment panel for the appointment of directors to the underlying subsidiaries, and there will be within that appointments panel, there will always be a representative of each council. So, and both those roles on the appointment panel are part of the quorum for any decision making or any meeting. So the shareholders will still have a key role in appointing the subsidiary boards.
Right. And through you, Mayor Rachel, Nikki, can you tell me, and I'd understand if you can't at this point, what the airport company, Nelson Airport Company, and the Port Nelson Limited are paying on their borrowings, interest rates they're paying on their borrowings at this time?
So through the chair, I don't have that information to hand. I think what we have focused on is the difference in the borrowing between what they're paying now and what the LGFA funding will be, and have treated that as a constant over time.
There is a desire by some people, like myself and others, to be able to track this, you see, have a starting point and follow it through as it progresses, if it does progress. So yeah, I would appreciate having that at some point soon, please.
I would think, those matters will be disclosed in the annual reports in any event, I would have thought. But we've got the representatives from the port here, so I'll ask them when they come forward to just to speak to that matter.
I have already earlier this morning discussed it with another council officer,
so
and I'm sorry to drop it on you.
Daryl, I'll ask you to cover that off in relation to the report when we hear from you shortly. Thank you.
And I'm not embarrassed through you, Madam Mayor, to ask for a copy. You've sent it and it was attached and I couldn't find it, and I've rung a particular councillor to see if she could help me with it. And that's I asked for a cast iron guarantee that what we were doing in establishing this infrastructure holding company was in fact
Sound's gone off.
I want to, thank you.
Just hold on for a moment, Councillor Courtney, because Councillor Sampson's saying the sound has disappeared. So I'll just check.
No, I didn't have my mic on.
Oh, was that what it was?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. You can hear us now, Councillor Sampson? Great. Okay, so thank you.
I really would like to ask, through you, Madam Mayor, if Officer Harrison can supply me. I tried to obtain a copy and locate a copy of the legal opinion that satisfied me, was proposed to satisfy me that what we were doing was actually, in setting up this holding company, was in fact within the law, or within the Act of Local Government. And there is another one that I just can't find quickly enough, but I can't locate it. A councillor was going to assist me with that, but that hasn't come through. So I would be appreciative if you could recirculate to members that legal opinion, please?
Through the chair, I can. It was in the public agenda attachment to the Joint Shareholders Committee, and it was page 159 of the public agenda.
All right, so
There was a legal sign off from Simpson Grierson.
could we have the date of that?
So it was the 7th of June Joint Shareholders Committee meeting, and it was page 159 of the attachments.
All right, okay, and somebody might be able to just locate that and circulate that one, just for, definitely has come through.
That'll do for the moment, thank you.
Has done, and it was quite, there were two sections of that, Councillor Courtney, I recall them quite distinctly that you wanted to have checked, and
Yes,
they would, and that legal review.
two sections of the Local Government Act 2002, and it's a subsequent amendment, and the other one was particularly in relation to the port company and the act under which it operates as a CCTO. So,
All right, thank you. Robin's on to that now. And the other item, just coming back to that, is Robin, are you able to locate the deliberations report from the long-term plan? It's a different one, so we'll just... Deliberations would have been May-ish, yeah. I think we're on to that, so that will come shortly. All right.
appreciate it, thank you.
No problem. Councillor Sansom, we'll come back to you and then we'll go to Councillor McGurk.
Councillor Eager asked my question.
Thank you, Councillor McGurk. Councillor Sansom.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, through the chair. So just in terms of the $233 million of unpaid capital, my understanding from the joint shareholder meetings and documentation was that the projections we have for the benefit gained in terms of interest cost savings has been projected out 10 years. And I think myself and maybe Councillor Edgar queried why the debt was only being projected or modelled out for 4 years. And then we were supplied with an additional document that showed debt projections out for 10 years, and there seemed to be a significant debt increase beyond the 4-year period. So which was part of the reason that the quantum has been set at $233 million. So I'm just wondering why, I guess, we're hearing that this isn't a debt, isn't underwriting a debt facility of $233 million.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you, through the chair. The uncalled capital provision of 233 million is out to June 2026. So on the graph of the future debt that is shown in 6.4, it is only accounting for the facility out to that level. You're correct, there is increased debt in the last few years of the 10-year projection that was used to build up the shadow credit rating. So through the chair, 4.10 in the report really covers off the components of it, and the debt within that first 4 years is relatively stable across that period.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So just sorry, clarification if it's possible. Is that possible?
It's possible. Yes, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So my understanding from all of the documentation I've seen is that the $233 million of uncalled capital actually covers that 10-year period, and that if comparing like with like, so projected interest savings, it's been projected over 10 years, and that projected debt over the 10 years has been set at around the $233 million quantum. So I think I'm struggling to understand why we kind of keep coming back to saying it's only going to be 100 million in 4 years when the projections have already been done out for 10 years.
I wonder if it would be helpful, Nikki, is that the paragraph I'm looking at is 4.5 on page 114, and that's where we're looking at the uninflated savings range from 822,000 per annum in the first year through to just over 2 million per annum in 2032. So that's on the basis that if the runway new runway project proceeds, because that's where and I'll just reference back to that assumption, which I don't believe is a correct assumption that Mr. Cross has made, is that when he's looking at that 120 million being further investment from the port, in fact that increase is tagged to the reason it's been modelled on the airport runway project. It's not Port Nelson investment, it's Nelson Airport investment, as I understand it. So I guess maybe I just want to clarify that, and then think Councillor Sampson, I think probably the range is explained in 4.7. So it wouldn't be unless we did the drawdown came on the new runway that you would get to the point where you had borrowings at a level that would deliver a $2 million per annum saving at 2032. That's as I understand it.
So through the chair, I think the confusion is we're talking about interest savings and debt. So that's now 4.5 and 4.6. So what I'm saying is, as the Mayor's alluded to, the savings in year one are, 822,000, and then they go up to just under 2 million in year 10. And the Mayor is correct. That assumes that the runway extension at the airport happens within the first 10 years of the plan. And when you look at the projected debt in the section 4.6, yes, it does, go from 115 to 200 million. The actual uncalled capital amount of 233, depending on whether or not the runway goes ahead, and which is why we've only sort of modelled the uncalled capital out to 2026. That may have to be increased at that point in time, depending on whether that project's there. But there is a placeholder for that project within the 10-year plan, because we don't know the timing of it, and we felt it was better to model it within the 10-year plan and within the shadow credit rating, so that there was provision for it, and it's been modelled at a really conservative amount.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Just one further clarification. So I think I just heard that the 233 million of uncalled capital is for the projected debt of 100 million over the next 4 years, and that beyond that, if investment was to happen in the runway extension, that the uncalled capital may have to increase beyond 233 million. Is that correct? Is that what I heard?
Through the chair, yes. In all my reports I've covered off as the uncalled capital amount is only modelled out to June 2026. It's covered in 4.10.
So what is the mechanism for increasing the uncalled capital in this arrangement?
So through the chair, it would have to come back to both councils for approval.
So it's a council controlled decision, that one. It has to come back to both councils. It would be a significant decision. And it would be in terms of that decision that had to be made, that's one that would have to come to the shareholders to go through to the shareholders process. Okay, thank you. Now, Councillor McGurk's question has already been asked and answered by Councillor McGurk. Any further, I'll just see, Nikki, have you got any other matters that you want to cover off? Because we might as well get all of them, and then I'll go back to questions, if that's all right. Oh, Councillor Brand's got a clarification question just on the matters we've been discussing.
Yeah, thank you, Premier. Just, you said that uncalled capital and the debt amount and stuff is relating to the airport runway extension only. Does the development that the port are undertaking or looking into, where does that fit into that then?
Thank you for that question of clarification. No, it's not only that. So that projection is including all the projects within the port and the airport over that 10-year period, and that's included in that debt profile in 4.6. I think what I was trying to say is predominantly that's the driver of the increase in the latter half of the 10-year plan.
Thank you. And my recollection, the president, and we'll come to the port company in a moment, but I think we've got fairly consistent debt levels that run through. So I don't think there's anything that was sitting out as extraordinary. I suppose from my perspective, Nikki, what I'm looking at is the opportunity here to take a more strategic approach to debt management. And, I appreciate the fact that we run the SOE/SOI process on that annual basis. But in fact, for the type of matters we're discussing, that the decisions that need to be made on, not on an annual cycle, they're projects and decisions that should be seen, in a 3, 5, 10-year program. And so my thinking here is that actually that's advantageous to us to move to that strategic debt management approach with some oversight from an independent chair and independent member who specialise in that space. That's, so just thinking about how we're approaching this, I think one of the things that you've been emphasising as we go through in relation to the questions from Councillor Rieger is that is actually one of the opportunities here is to take a longer term, more strategic approach. And I think the elected members have certainly raised those matters in relation to climate change impacts. And this gives us that opportunity to really make sure we're having those conversations early and often as we go through into those big decisions that have to be made. It's not a question, it's just in my thinking as we go through. I haven't seen anything here that would say that we'll be less strategic. What I'm seeing is an opportunity for us to be more strategic. All right, I think if there's anything else that you want to present now, Nikki, I'll let you do that, and then I'll invite Daryl and Hugh to join the meeting. All right, Daryl and Hugh, would you like to come down to the meeting? Now, I'm conscious there are matters that have been raised in public forum that relate to the commerciality of Port Nelson, and it may be that you need to respond to those in confidential. So if you do, then I'll just ask you to indicate how you want to approach those. There may be some matters you want to cover off in public. So we're in public now, and I'll let you guide me as to where you want to be for the discussion. Welcome. Just when you're ready, Hugh, welcome.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to address a number of points which follows up some correspondence that we've said. And I think also Nikki and the Mayor have suggested that we pick up some of the elements that were raised this morning. So firstly, if I can just refer to some letters that we sent through to the mayors.
Right, and I think they are sitting in confidential, so because they relate to commercial matters in relation to the port. So do you think it's appropriate, Nikki, that we move into confidential now? Look, and we'll deal with...
I think some of those matters aren't that confidential. All right. If you're happy for me just to steer slightly above that line, I think we'll be fine.
Well, as you are, they're your matters, Hugh. I will let you judge that. Thank you.
No, that's fine. Look, I think the first point, if I can remember that, was just the... I'll call it transparency, but I think there were a few media releases that some council members felt came as a surprise. And I think without going into the detail of that, I think it was good to get that dialogue and just highlight that actually these are quite complicated matters as to issues that perhaps we don't see as material to the extent that it's a lease swap, for example, in Marlborough. There's a bit of marketing initiation in there as well. So for us, it's not a major, but obviously for councillors it is, and it was just looking forward to finding perhaps a better way to make sure we don't have those issues again. So that what was really the purpose of that part. I think the second area, some concerns were raised about risks from things that are stored on or around the port and the potential for explosions and various other things. So hopefully that letter addressed those issues. And look, I think in short, there is fuel down there, there is the methanol tanks, but we don't have vast stores of urea. We're scrutinised by WorkSafe annually, as are the people who store hazard wastes. So there's really a very low risk in that area. And the third area I think I might have touched on in the letter was just the issue of banking and commercial facilities, and perhaps if I use that to back into the discussion we had this morning from Mr. Cross, and just staying on the factual side of that, if I could just pick up a few issues. But probably the first one is the motivation of Port Nelson board and the management. And it's the driver of Holdco from our perspective is solely about reducing costs. So we sit there with a very strong relationship with Westpac. Westpac have indicated to us that they would be happy to lend up to 180 million. You know, that's vastly above what we perceive we need.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just with the noise in this room at the moment, I might just get you to move that microphone a little bit closer to you. Thank you.
So they manage us with a light touch. We have regular catch-ups, but certainly every time we apply money to a particular area, you know, we're not scrutinised as to why you're spending that. So we have a facility that we draw down as we need. I think. So really, that's just to underlie, you know, the driver is how we save money. And if we go to the world that the ports are in at the moment, it's very difficult to push the top line. And that comes back to, you know, we're negotiating with parties such as Maersk, who, you know, probably for many people at the top level of Maersk, they've got no idea where Nelson is. So that negotiation is a tricky commercial piece. Yet, probably like a lot of businesses, the bottom line, the cost line is shifting up dramatically. You know, and certainly in the current climate, you've got wage increase. We've got an overlay of COVID. We've got an area in environment, health and safety, and people matters that are moving quite aggressively and becoming more demanding. So that whole cost structure is moving, and that's the challenge most businesses face, but certainly ports face. And the particular overlay, and this comes back to the issue of some of the capital spend, is the port is infrastructure-wise quite old. So the demand at the moment, we're in the top end of a refresh cycle. So we had Main Wharf North, we've got a couple of cranes who are now looking a bit fatigued. A plant is coming up for replacement. So we will be in a phase of just upgrading that plant over the next sort of 15-ish years. And the positive of that, from an environmental point of view, it is a great opportunity for transition. So, you know, we've got quite good visibility on that. But again, if I come back to the banks, you know, we have a very comfortable relationship with the banks at the moment. We would just love that money to be cheaper. If I could just touch on some of the commercial strength of the port, which was raised this morning. The numbers have been thrown around by the debt that the airport and the port require. So currently the airport, the port borrows about 76 million. I think the airport's around about 30. We go up to about 130 million, round about, I'm going to say year 6, 7. And the sole driver for that increase, which is 50-ish million, is our investment in science and technology precinct. So if we chose not to do that, our debt level would be at a similar level. That investment for us, the hat we wear is a developer's hat. So it's a venture to make appropriate returns on that land. And it has the added benefit of social benefits to the city. So you know, that's an investment of debt to make a commercial return. I think if you look at the airport debt side, of course, that is an extension of the runway, and that's a bit like us replacing the wharf. You know, it's a difficult one to get significant revenue growth off, but it's something that you need to do. When we were going through the shadow ratings using PwC, the port was rated, and the strength of the port as BBB, and we hold that BBB rating throughout the next period of 10-ish years, and that's an investment grade rating. The airport has it's a smaller entity. It's currently sitting at about BBB minus. When it borrows to do the runway, if it does that, it goes down to a BB. So the benefit of IHL actually isn't the port being a problem that's propped up by the airport. It's actually the port's strength has an ability to allow the airport to borrow cheaper funds, which is a positive. I think if I could just look at Port Nelson from a strategic perspective. So I think there's a reference there to the last 7 years. NPAT hasn't really moved. It actually has moved slightly up, but the port is very reflected by its cargo. So, and unfortunately fires. So 2019, there was a fire and the port did really well that year. It was on top of a reasonably good harvest, but a lot of the wood that was burnt headed out the port. And so it was a very good revenue year. Go back last year or the previous year, we had a frost and cargo's down is a dramatic hit to our profit. This next year, we're looking at a strong wine harvest and apple harvest. So in 2003, we should see some lift up in revenue. So generally, the underlying trend is flat to upwards, but it's really knocked around by these events. There's reference also, and I think to the Auditor-General's commentary on ports, and the challenge was really, look, are you applying a return on WACC when you're doing your projects and investments? So it's something that our board is very, very conscious of. Every investment that goes forward to the board is challenged, and we have to present that you're getting a return on your target investment. Assets are growing with just the revaluation of land and property, but we check each year our total asset picture using Deloitte's to make sure that the asset we're holding can actually be sustained and justified by its income stream. So I think at the moment there's certainly no concern that our asset growth is moving away from our ability to afford it. And look, perhaps if, Madam Chair, if I bring this to a close, one of the issues, so we've taken on board the concern that, look, how at risk is the uncalled capital, and putting that aside, how at risk are the activities of the port for its shareholders. And really, it's like looking at Swiss cheese. There are, in our count, there was something like 16 layers that protect the shareholders from any issues. And one of the key issues is the shareholders have chosen to have an independent board of professional directors, and that is your fundamental. But over and above that, we have executive management, we have ratios that we must keep within. So you have a whole line of those Swiss cheeses. And I think that then you look at the three events that could possibly significantly disrupt the port or any business, and there are really three to my mind. One is that you have a major customer that fails on you. Secondly, you have a major project initiative that fails on you. And thirdly is you have a major natural event that you can't recover from. The port is blessed with quite a wide portfolio of major customers and a wide portfolio of custom, albeit much of that's actually in the primary industry, so that is a vulnerability. But individually, what we find is apples might be down, but we'll have a strong log season. Wine might be impacted in Marlborough, but not so in Tasman. So generally, there's a mitigation there. I'm sorry, I just lost my thought there. So. Just to come back to that Swiss cheese. So the real issue then is the seismic event, and we have $350 million of cover for a seismic event. Assets are in the book for 500-ish million. The information we have of the chance of exceeding 350 is very, very low. I think if that event does happen, with 350 million, we have the ability to work out and get significant parts of the port back in business that are making money. We can sustain our profitability through that, and then we will slowly build the business back up, investing where we need to invest. So we really struggle to see any event that would trigger an Armageddon type situation. Madam Chair, that's...
Thank you. Hugh, did you just cover off the project matter? I think you just...
Yeah, sorry. The projects, I guess similar to the customers, we have really such a diverse array of projects. So Main Wharf at 25 million was really only, I think that's only 8% of our total assets. The science and technology is a big chunk, but it's, if you call that it's at 70 million, that's still of a 500, that's under 20%. The benefit with science and technology, it's segmented, so each tenant will be justified and feasibility will support that investment on its own account. So, so I think the project risk is non-existent.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any questions on the material that Hugh's presented? And we'll cover those off first, and then we'll move into confidential for any matters that we need to cover there. Go to the Deputy Mayor first, and then to Councillor Courtney. And right at this moment, I'm multitasking, and Hugh, you could probably tell that while you were speaking, but I'm listening to everything you were saying, but I'm just conscious that I've got notes coming to me saying that councillors would like the parts of the deliberations report sent through that relate to Uncalled capital. I haven't seen an email on that, but in the meantime, I have copied and pasted the pieces out of the deliberations report, and I will email it to you in a moment. So councillors, just expect that to be on its way now. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Excuse me. So, Hugh, just picking up a couple of points and following up from this morning's public forum. And so just probably clarify a couple of ones, because one of the points raised was the Office of the Auditor-General's concern about overinvestment by port companies. And so you have an annual check done by Deloitte that sort of looks at that, the level of investment you're proposing going forward. Can you just clarify that point?
So, look, I think the key issue, my interpretation of the Auditor-General was ports competing for the same cargo. So if everyone invests and assuming they get that cargo, then they've wasted that infrastructure investment. For Nelson, we've pretty much got our investment. We're not looking at any major expansion of our infrastructure. The issue is through Key Connect, we're providing a very strong service over into Marlborough, which has been recognised and appreciated by the custom we've had now for over 7 years. So that's, I guess, that on the issue of what Auditor-General's focused on, which is wasted investment, that doesn't apply to us. In terms of the challenge of every time you make an investment, making sure that you're making a capital return on it, that was my reference to the board's interrogation on WACC. On the issue of your second point there, which was
Deloitte.
Sorry?
Deloitte.
So it's really just part of our accounting process that we just check, and I think it's a part of for us, that we check that the assets that you're holding in your accounts can be justified by the income you earn. So that's just part of the normal check. That's not directly related to the Auditor-General.
And just in relation, so, I mean, you may have already answered this question, but it was just to do with volumes and underlying key assumptions. And that was, just looking at what independent advice, or do you get independent advice to sort of support those assumptions? So like I'm well aware with the airport, of course, that, all businesses are quite a ever-changing landscape, and assumptions historically were made at the airport with numbers of airlines that went up. It can just as quickly go down. So what checks, or do you work with NRDA or independent advisors on some of those key underlying assumptions?
Sure. So each year when we develop our budget and annual plan, and we're just in that phase at the moment, Daryl facilitates the process where we go out to all our major customers. So if you take apples, we would go to 4 or 5 major exporters of apples, and we would get their long-term forecasts. And then we would correlate that with data from Infometrics and sort of New Zealand industry perspectives. And from that, we would make our deductions as to where we think the cargo lines would go. So that's generally using the exporters who have detailed knowledge of their markets and then correlating that with broader industry experts.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through to Hugh. Thanks for your presentation. Hugh, you mentioned the sole reason for, as far as your operation is concerned, the Port Nelson Limited, is to reduce costs. So far, the costs of setting up this infrastructure holding company has reached 350,000 and still climbing. I can't believe this dramatic restructuring has been taking place, initiated, I would suggest, by the port company, save costs when there are so many in the size business that you operate. The size of the business, so many facets to it. There'd be so many more efficiencies and cost savings that could be undertaken without choosing this particular avenue for a 1% reduction in interest rates. I find that incredible. I really do. Because we were told, anyone comment on that, please?
Sure. Look, again, in our annual planning process, we would go through every cost line. So even things such as the company dinner, annual dinner, have we got that right? Is that the right balance? Interest, the ability to save that $800,000. So let's say after tax, that might be $500,000. And we pay dividends to this council or to councils of 4 million. So $500,000 on 4 million is actually, I think my maths is right, about 12.5%. It's a material number. So when we've gone through strategically looking at every cost line, how we could move things, this was the biggest shift that we could see when we had a look at it. And again, I would say, if we call our profit 8 million, 800,000 is 10% of your profit. That's a material number. And also it's climbing, of course, as we borrow more money.
Thank you. Through you, Rachel, we were told when we were out at TDC at a joint committee meeting there that we may not see the this projected increase in this interest saving for 1, 2 or even 3 years. But our officers have sort of walked back on that and said, oh no, it'll be but the decision is with the board, isn't it? The new holding company board as to whether they pay a dividend and how much they pay and how much they retain. Isn't that the system if this is passed?
I think, sorry.
So through the chair, yes, the decision on the dividends is made at the IHL board level. I think the matter that you're referring to is how the actual establishment costs are funded and whether or not they're funded all in year one or spread over multiple years, because there is multiple years benefit of this.
Mm. If I could ask a question there about, a major project and the possibility of failing, because what we're concerned about around this table is risk. There was no risk previous to this possibility coming on the table. There was no risk to the ratepayer in respect of the operations of the port or the airport. Those risks were carried with the trading bank, as you know, and we all know that. So in respect of the operation that you're developing or proposing over in Marlborough, would you say you're entering into a pretty substantial risk there? Because you appear through the media, because we knew nothing about it, to be gazumped by the Marlborough Port with their inland port announced 2 weeks after your announcement and closer to a railway linkage and that type of thing. So shareholders, we pick up on this and we think, well, do we see a developing a risk here? Comment on that?
Madam Chair, could I go to confidential on that one?
Yes, that's commercial matter. I would say, Councillor Courtney, that just I don't know that I could agree with your statement that there has been no risk. There has been risk and set out and probably in the 3 categories that were highlighted by Hugh. Those risks have been there and they've been there for the shareholders, both in relation to the airport and the port. So they're existing risks that we manage through our statement of intent process, but the exposure is still there. So I don't see the risk profile having been no risk for council to this point. What I'm hearing from Mr. Morrison is that in terms of major customers, the diversity of customers at the port gives some protection. Natural disasters, yes, there could have been a natural disaster. The Kaikoura earthquake wave could have come up under Nelson rather than going under us and coming out on the other side of the west coast. Those risks are still there. So I think that's probably the scenario. But I think the matter that there's a very specific matter that you want to explore, and we'll take that in confidential. All right.
Great respect, I disagree with your interpretation of that. There is risk. There is no, the banks carry the risk at the present time, Madam Mayor, but we won't debate that now, do you think? I don't, unless you want to, I don't think we should. I'll move on. No, I'll let someone else ask a question in the meantime and I'll just gather my thoughts. Did you want to say something else?
Oh, sorry, Councillor Courtney, did you want me to answer the question about Marlborough Inland Port?
Yes, we will. So we'll move into confidential and we'll take any matters that relate to commercial matters of commercial matters and confidential. So I'll have to ask Finn that you'll need to just step out while we go into confidential, and we will. Can somebody just support Finn in terms of finding another room for him to be in while we're out of here? I'm not sure what the arrangements are at the moment, or have you got that in hand, Finn?
Yeah, I've been told to go.
Oh, fantastic. All right, you're well across what needs to happen. Thank you. And we just need the reasons up on the screen as to why we're going into confidential. Robin, I'll just get those just for our people on Zoom, particularly. It's on its way, it won't be very long.
Madam Chair, I'm comfortable as to why we're going into confidential.
You're right. Okay, thank you. Councillor Sanson, are you comfortable as well?
Sorry, are you asking everybody if we're comfortable?
Just for the people on Zoom, because I'm conscious that it's a little bit harder on Zoom to sort of follow what's going on in the room. I just don't want you to be disadvantaged at all in terms of the reasons.
No, I'm fine. I'm following. It's not hard at all.
Okay.
Like almost 3 years of this, I'm totally used to it. Comfortable, happy. Thanks.
All right. Well, Robin's got it. Robin's got it now anyway. So we'll share it. Do the screen share. Lovely. Oh, you can't share to Zoom. Okay, I'll read it out there. Then, okay, that the council confirms in accordance with sections 48.5 and 48.6 of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987 that Hugh Morrison and Daryl Weiner from Port Nelson Limited remain after the public have been excluded for the confidential agenda as they have knowledge relating to item 4 confidential attachment to report 26950 that will assist the meeting, and then further that the council excludes the public from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting: the general subject of such each matter to be considered while the public is excluded, the reason for passing this resolution in relation to each matter, and the specific grounds under section 48.1 of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987 for the passing of this resolution are as follows. They relate to section 7.2H, which is to enable the local authority to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities. All right, we're happy with that. Everyone's happy with that reason. Pat, you're happy with that reason? Right, I shall so move. Do I have a second? Thank you, Councillor McGurk. I will put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. We'll just give April a moment to do whatever she needs to do. She'll let us know when she's ready. Oh, and I just need to cover off the questions to Councillor Sensen and Councillor Rainey, that you are in a place where you cannot be overheard or overlooked. Thumbs up. Yep. Okay, excellent. And Councillor Rainey's